Do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday said tomorrow. So just do it! Make your dreams come true!
Welcome to Screen Tones, where we talk anything and everything webcomics. Today we're going to be talking about literary agents and how they operate within the world of webcomics. I'm Delphina, I use she, her pronouns, and I make the comic Sombulus.
And I'm Thane, and I use the pronouns she, they. I make the comics Witchwood and Chiralt. And for this episode, we have a guest.
Hi, everyone. I'm Seth Fishman. I use the pronouns he, him. And I'm a literary agent. I'm the vice president and head of the West Coast office of the Gernert Company, and I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you here. So, webcomics specifically have a long history of being solo enterprises by their creators, operating independently of any sort of larger publishing structure. But more and more lately, these fields have been growing and they've been getting more and more closely intertwined. So, Seth, tell us a bit about your job. What do you do as a literary agent?
Yes. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. This kind of discussion, bringing a literary agent to even discuss webcomics, I think is still sort of newish. But believe it or not, I've been working with webcomics for 9-10 years now. And the webcomic industry, as you've noted, has changed over time. We'll talk about that, of course. But what I do as a literary agent is mainly work to both protect my clients' interests when there are any agreements or contracts or opportunities that arise, and then also to sort of discover and find what those opportunities might be. And there are certainly a lot of them. So there is this world that webcomics inhabit, which is direct to consumer, but that can be a much larger play. And I said the word play. I don't like that. That sounds so businessy, but much larger reality beyond just the intimacy of one-on-one, connectivity between a reader and a creator. And the agent is there to help protect you in that realm and also discover the extent of that realm. Now, that's a very nebulous answer, but there's so much to say there. So that's where we'll start.
Yeah, it's a huge web out there. There's definitely a lot of stuff happening that can take some time for creators and anybody interested in webcomics to discover. So I also wanted to ask, how does the typical agent and webcomic artist relationship start?
Right. It's an interesting thing. I think with novels, much different, right? You want to write a book, you toil in your room and you write it. You might be at an MFA program, so on and so forth, but then you go and try and find an agent. You know to look for an agent, you're hunting for an agent. In the webcomic world, a lot of times it's about building your own platform by yourself for a long time before you connect to an agent. And that is sort of the reality of the world. A lot of times publishers sort of work with webcomics once they hit a level. And as soon as a publisher is interested, though, any type of publisher, there's probably need for at least some of the protections that an agent or even sort of legal expertise might have play in. So that is the nebulous answer. The more specific, me kind of thing is I tend to find clients by either, recommendations, which is sort of in a lot of ways the most trusted, best thing that happens, people that you work with sharing the contacts of other people when they're looking for agents. But the way it works otherwise is sort of just discovery. And every once in a while I will go on Instagram and start following 20-30 new webcomics and just sort of start. I know this might sound bad, but if I read them and don't love the work, then I'll just start unfollowing them. But if I like it and it sticks around with me, then I start to consider about approaching that person. And that's before there's even an interest necessarily on the webcomic side as to whether they want to work with me. So sometimes that's me, reaching out. And then I have my own, a lot of times agents have their own relationships with publishers, whether that's a traditional, big five publisher like Penguin Random House, or whether that's one of the more, the newer, but, larger webcomic audience homes like Tapas or Webtoons. You have relationships with them, and then sometimes that leads to them talking to you about sort of some of the webcomics that they represent. And as you can hear, that's still pretty one-sided. That's a lot of that's about me or about the agent, but where it expands is as soon as you connect. And the big difference about webcomics and say novelists is that webcomics don't know much about literary agents, don't necessarily feel like they need literary agents, and sometimes they might be right. But so my job is oftentimes an uphill battle, made easier over time by the clients that I rep, being able to point to the people that I rep and sort of show what I've been able to help them with. But it's an interesting, different world where you almost have to educate completely who and what who I am and what an agent is for, which is a fun challenge. It keeps you on your toes, and it also means that you have to be 100% passionate about what you work with. So that's the sort of traditional angles of approach. Yeah.
That's so interesting that you say that people really don't know what to expect from an agent, and so part of your job is that kind of educational process. I mean, it's true. And so one of my questions was like, what are some common misconceptions about what agents do and don't do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that a common misconception is just sort of the parasitic nature of an agent. There are agents that exist that are only there for money making schemes, but this is a pretty passion based job where you're connected with people because you love them, you love the work that they do, and you want to sort of help that work reach the largest audience and also help you live whatever dreams you might have. So in terms of misconceptions, a lot of times there's this feeling, especially in webcomics who are able to sort of make their own money and make their own deals, that if they have a deal in the works, that if they take on an agent, that's just an agent hopping in and sort of taking a percentage of that, not really being a value add. I think what's often wrong in that scenario, or the other big thing, is that they'll make less money through a publisher than they would direct, and that's not necessarily wrong. But what an agent can help you understand is that there are lots of other sort of purposes to a traditional publishing deal. So if you had a deal from a place and you were like, oh, well, now I don't need to get an agent. Well, a lot of times the value of an agent probably pays off by just looking at the contract itself and protecting various rights you have. There's a number of webcomics I've taken on who've had deals under their belt before I started working with them. And mind you, I love their work and probably and we weren't ready to just sell another book. I wasn't going to make any money right away, and that's fine. But some of the rights that were granted for some of these iconic titles were given to the publisher, from film and TV to foreign. And with a literary agent on your side, you immediately should be earning that 15% back, which is, by the way, the standard domestic rate, just by the contract. But there are so many other things. It moves so far beyond that. And I think that one of the things that webcomics sort of are used to, they're very good at doing things on your own, but they are not good at understanding or realizing the benefits of having someone in your corner to be the bad guy to the editor, to be able to bounce ideas off, career moves. And these are just sort of random things we do. It's not the full specific rundown of why you should, to be with an agent. I think that sometimes people think that agents, in terms of what they do that are misconceptions. I think that sometimes people think that agents like only work with one place, or never, or you can't approach them, or with questions you have to sort of, the power dynamic is weird with agents, right? You people want an agent, they feel like you're it's someone that sort of has the bigger power play and a structure. But the truth of the matter is that we work for you. And if you, as webcomics, which I love about webcomics, y'all treat each other like a a business, like you are a business where you're your own business, which is great. So that means you hire an agent. So when you hire an agent, that is that means we work for you. And that kind of power dynamic is something people don't really know or understand. But it means that you can ask questions. It means that you can get to the bottom of what it means to have an agent and have someone in your corner, and not go with the first person who's interested in connecting to you. So that's just some of the things. There's so many specific tasks that an agent does that I would like to go over, at some point in this. But the misconceptions are heavily really sort of, I think, based on suspicion that we're just trying to sort of take your money and success, like Hollywoody kind of gross. And I don't think that's really not the way I work, and not the other few agents. There's not so many of us that like sort of solely represent web, or not solely, but really focus on web comics, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like when researching like agents and so on, one of the things that kind of tends to come up is just that there's a lot of little opportunities or contract details that many webcomic creators are not really aware of when entering the scene, and it might just not occur to people to like investigate these things or really push for it, especially if you're interacting with a company for kind of the first time. One thing that I'm also curious about, though, when dealing with webcomics, because it's such a specific world where creators are very often kind of doing their own thing independently for a long time, or they might have multiple projects going on. What does your agenting role look like for webcomics specifically? Like, do you usually represent the webcomic itself, or are you more representing the creator and kind of handling their other projects and pitches and different things they might be involved with?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I realized sort of at this point that it might be worthwhile sharing the names of a couple of the webcomics I do represent, so that I can start referencing them in terms of some of the things we've done. Is that okay if I head that alley really quick and then come back to what an agent specifically does?
Yeah.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So when I said I started a while ago, the first webcomic I took on was Kate Beaton. Kate Beaton's creator of Hark a Vagrant. And at the time, Hark a Vagrant was, it's a website. And the webcomics that I took on back in those days, like XKCD, Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal, a lot of those are specific website based. And nowadays, as you know, webcomics can be narrative stories that are on Tapas, or they can be almost entirely Instagram based. And now, TikTok has its legs doing various other things as well. So the world is much different. And so I do rep now also more modern. When I say modern, again, I mean these newer. It's all about the way the consumers view and look at, consume the content. So like Sarah Anderson, or Nathan Pyle of Strange Planet, uh, um, to Katie Cook, who's a webtoon focused, but does a lot of other things. So a lot of I have experience with different webcomics doing all sorts of different things. And one thing that's, it heads into this, the question is, do I represent the webcomic, or do I represent the writer? And I represent the writer. I'm not really interested in representing sort of a one-off. I like to work with people in their careers all the way through. And there are, some of the Hollywood agencies are more sort of project driven. Doesn't mean they wouldn't represent the creator, but I think most of the New York based agencies tend to be focused along those lines. And as an example, I brought up Nathan Pyle. I mean, I took Nathan on before Strange Planet came out, probably 2 months before he did his first Strange Planet, just because I loved the humor he was working with, but I didn't know what he would be creating. And then Strange Planet came out, and we sort of, and it took off, and we took the project and ran in all sorts of different directions, from everything like deals with, from merch with Threadless, to foreign deals, to kids picture book deals, to collections at HarperCollins, to a greenlit TV show that's coming out on Apple pretty soon. All sorts of different things that you can do. So let's break into really quick, like the stuff that I would normally want to work with someone, or what an agent is for. Again, an agent's very much for contracts, and this is really huge because contracts have boilerplates, contracts have a set of expectations, and when there is an agency involved, then those contracts just get better automatically because we have negotiated boilerplates based on our sort of largest clients. So our newest smaller clients are benefiting from the larger clients that we represent, that we've negotiated bigger things for. And that we also have most agencies have sort of in-house counsel. We have counsel that we pay for. So part of that 15% that we take as a commission goes to cover this counsel. And if you don't use an agent, I still recommend you paying by the hour or getting an entertainment lawyer who takes 5% to look at your contracts, because it's just incredibly important. And when we do that, we're going to retain some of these rights, and we don't then just sit on them. We do stuff with those rights. So say we retain translation rights, then if you're at a good agency, then that agency has a foreign rights team, and we do have a foreign rights team, and we sell the material from those webcomics abroad. And some are easier than other, like XKCD's What If, reads like a nonfiction science book that's just on a normalized list that has some cartoons in there, and it's very XKCD-ish, but it's not just a collection of comics. So it's a different kind of more accessible to everyone kind of game. And we've sold that in I think 40 different languages. But other projects that other projects might be harder, but that said, even sometimes it's even about the decision whether you want to keep it with a publisher like Andrews McMeel, which is a big webcomic publisher. I have some pros and cons to say about them. I think the biggest con about Andrews McMeel is that they will sort of offer really low budget deals to unrepresented webcomics all the time, and try and throw things at the wall and see if they stick. And if they get big, then they do really well. They really do well. But I mean, the Dana Simpson or Sam Anderson, who I rep, they do really well by, but they sort of start small and they hoover up a lot of these rights. But I will say they've done quite well with Sarah in terms of selling her rights abroad. So when that happens, just to be clear, when they sell those rights abroad, a percentage of it does come back to the author. It's just less than, and you have less control over that. And that's part of it, right? You want control over your material and over your everything, from the way things look to the way things sound and are presented. So there's a foreign rights component for film and TV. Some agencies have a film and TV person in their agency. We choose not to. We work with whoever we want. So Kate Beaton's, she has the show on Apple from a picture book that she wrote that I sold. Not her Vagrant. That's through WME, or we work with CAA. We work with smaller places, like Hotchkiss and Associates. So we connect you with the person who's the right person for your film and TV work. And there's no more percentage that comes out of that. It's the same 15%. It's just split between the two. And then we help you into that space. We can help with merchandise. We can either set you up with a merch agent. I work with someone on a lot of projects. Now, merch agents cost more, unfortunately, between 25 and 40%. And I'm not 100% sure why. I think it's just the world that they live in. Speakers bureaus also cost too much money, in my opinion, but that's the world. And we try and negotiate that down if we have a relationship. And then sometimes we can appropriately make those deals for you, also for speaking's event, and also for things like, if you're going to a convention, we can try and get better terms and things set up for you at those conventions as well. And those are sort of the primary, but then you go to that relationship with the publisher, and there's so much to do there. Everything from, again, being the bad guy, being able to say the things that you want to say while not ruining your relationship with an editor or with the publisher, but also, protecting you in terms of when monies are delivered, and making sure that they like you like your cover, and you like the title, and that you are getting the events you need for publication. And it's not even just basically that. It's also the idea that we have a value add knowledge base. I've been doing this for a long time. Not only do I have my own clients that I can help get blurbs from for you, but I also, know who are big fans of webcomics. Like, I know Lev Grossman, who, when he was at Time, was able to write those sort of articles about. So an agent helps all the way through, from to publicity, to collecting royalties, to your other ideas. And that's the other thing, the other ideas. You want to do a webcomic and you want to do other things, though. Say you want to write a kid's book, great. Say you want to just illustrate a kid's book, great. Say you want to do spot art for a poet that you love, great, we can work with that. Say you want to write a memoir that's really intense, that took 8 years to do, again, back to Kate Beaton's and Ducks, that's coming out soon. We can do that and then negotiate a deal that's appropriate for such an important work. So that was a long answer, but it's really important. An agent does everything, is every step of the way there, and helps take that business load off. And the other thing I actually forgot is, in this day and age, Kickstarter and direct to the consumer is a large part of what's going on as well. And I personally have sort of plug and play opportunities with clients to do Kickstarters. And if a client says to me, I want to do this on my own, that's fine. Zach Weinersmith does his own Kickstarters, and I don't touch it. But what I do is, if you went and looked those up, you'll see that sometimes for his book that's published with Penguin Random House, there are pre-order opportunities there. And so I help make a sort of a connectivity opportunity through all your projects in order to make like a holistic sort of world. And I guess I would say business, because that's part of it. You got to think that way, but it's also the world and that you live in. And the other final thing is, like, say you are known as a webcomic and you want to do some of a specific webcomic, called the Daily Legs. I don't know, just made that up. You're very famous for that, but then you start wanting to do the Daily Hands. How do you do that? How do you do that in a way that allows your fans to come over, or takes the hit of losing some fans? And I help in that process too, either making deals or just sort of use the experience to sort of create that opportunity. So that's a lot that we do. We do quite a bit. And the real question, it does come, hey, I'm doing this on my own. We're doing just fine. And you might be doing just fine. And that's okay. A lot of times, though, especially when it's webcomics and you can just collect things, there are just some opportunities, and a traditional publishing opportunity, for good or for ill, allows a different level of people to look at things. Sometimes direct to consumer and your fans, it's all you need. You need your Patreons, and you need your fans on Instagram. But you also, when you're published by HarperCollins or Simon & Schuster or Andrews McMeel, your accessibility to conventions changes, your ability to get awards changes, your ability to get reviews and press at a higher level does change, for good or for ill. And so sometimes even a singular publication is almost like a worth it, just one, and then you go back to whatever was happening before if you didn't like it, but you'd still be able to expand a base and reach a different kind of world. So I highly suggest it if it's the right thing to be doing. That was
That's so interesting.
I could talk forever about this.
No, thank you for that. That was, oh no, gosh, I'm just thinking about all the things. I mean, so what I'm hearing is that if you have an agent, you really don't want to be shy about asking questions, and you really want to be brainstorming for opportunities, looking at the pieces of the pie that you've baked and seeing what other flavors those touch, and the agent will help you make this kind of multi-flavored pie instead of just the one flavor of pie.
Yeah, if that's right. I mean, some people can't handle that. Some people are not fast enough. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that it doesn't necessarily make sense for them to stop updating their webcomic, right? You don't want to do that. Some people are desperate to stop updating their webcomic and do other things. So it's really up to what people want to do. I never tell anyone what they should do. What I like to do is have them present to me their dreams, their wants, their asks. Do they want to collaborate with, I don't know, Reese Witherspoon? Like, what is it that you want to do? And some of those things are doable, and some of those things aren't, and some of those things are commercial, and some of those things aren't. And we sort of narrow and focus on the things that make sense for that person's career. And then I help them learn what they need to do that, whether that's create a pitch or whether that's just sort of head in that direction a little bit and see if it works, So it's about being able to even just educate about the opportunities, which I think is a big thing that people don't know, is what is even out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of artists kind of get in this headspace of, am I good enough for an agent? What should I do? And so just being able to know there's a lot of things you can do actually, and there's so many directions you can take it. So I did want to ask it, let's say I have an agent, I'm ready to go, I have a lot of different ideas. What kinds of habits should I as a creator be cultivating if I want to get the most out of working with an agent? What are the best practices? What are the worst practices? Like, how do I take advantage and make the most out of having an agent?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. We touched upon it a little bit. The biggest one is being willing to to ask the questions and connect. I mean, everything from reading the representation agreement I send and then asking for a phone call to go over what it means. In other words, to still educate yourself like you're a business and sort of know what you're about, to just making sure that you're in touch and you're updated. A lot of times people will say, "Oh, I submitted this to my agent months ago and I haven't heard back." Now, there could be a good reason for that, but months is a long time, and webcomics tend to be easier to read than novels. And you need to be able to feel like the person you're working with is someone you trust and that you don't feel weird about connecting with. You're not like, should I bother them or anything? No, remember, they work for you. Now, I have all sorts of different relationships with clients. Some of them are really client agents, and then others, like one of my clients is my son's godmother. I mean, it's a variant kind of thing, but that's humanity, right? That's the world we live in. But you do want to feel like you trust your person and that you can connect with that person about any ideas along the ways. You shouldn't be in a thing where you're just passing on the deal once it's almost done. It should be from the germination phase once you're working with them. I mean, we're web comics. You're probably coming initially with something in hand. I don't necessarily mean a deal, but like a web comic idea or something that's actually had some legs online. But I do think it's really about being able to trust this person and being able to just not, it's very much like a relationship. You just got to feel like there's no games being played. You can text. Well, I don't know about texting necessarily, but I mean to say you have your own boundaries and you're able to connect and feel like you're not bothering a person, and that you also want to be heard from, and you also want to hear what they have to offer as well.
Yeah, that totally makes sense for someone who's, especially when it comes to creative work, which can be so like personal and important to people. You don't want that relationship to feel like awkward.
Right.
To kind of step it back a little bit, for a lot of our listeners who may not have ever kind of dabbled in this world before, for creators who have no experience in there and are looking into it for the first time, what should a prospective client or creator have prepared before approaching an agent?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it depends on what you're doing. So, since we're speaking about webcomics, we'll start there. Again, the strong assumption is that you have a webcomic. And the biggest unfortunate is that it is true, having a sizable audience will make it easier to both find an agent and to get a publication deal. And some publishers really care about, audience size and engagement. And I think that can be pretty frustrating, but an agent cares less. It's just that it's harder to find people that have a smaller audience sometimes, because like for me, I'm pretty full up. I have a pretty full list, so I'm not hunting the back halls of tapas for new people launching webcomics. So how do things actually come to mind? It's the things that have large enough audiences that it becomes undeniable for me to see it, or someone else sends it my way. But then sometimes things do poke through. But I guess what I mean to say is, yeah, you kind of need to go through the grind a little bit in order to get an agent or a publisher. But even more important than that is you need to create something great, which is a crazy thing to say in some ways. We're all trying to create great things, but that, I think in other ways it should be really comforting that one of the most important things is still very simply, you must the writing you must rely on the writing. The writing matters, the art matters. This stuff that you're doing, your style is you, and is going to be what someone is really passionate about. And if I'm passionate about something, I don't care if there's a big audience. Like I took on Tilly Walden when she was at Avery Hill and she was just starting to come about, and I found out about her from another client, a UK. That's probably how I found out about her, because Isabel Greenberg's based in the UK, and she told me about Tilly, and then I was just so passionate about what Tilly was doing, and everyone sort of felt that way. But like on a Sunbeam, what's funny about that wasn't a planned thing. Tilly just went and did it, and everyone was like, "This is amazing. Let's do something with it." And I I didn't either, so I didn't tell her to go do it, or she didn't even ask. It just sort of happened. And so sometimes discoverability is the trickiest part, I would say. Now that's web comics. If you have any other sort of traditional publishing game, then there is a more traditional publishing path, which is you write these things, you make sure people read and edit it who you support, and get you to the level where you feel like it's ready to go out. And then you find an agent. And the way that you find an agent normally would be to basically find out who you respect and like, who are either similar to you or who you just love, and who reps them. And you can find that in the acknowledgments of books, or you can find it online sometimes, a lot of times in their contacts. And that's another thing agents do. We block a lot of people connecting to, of course, if you want to write something that's not a webcomic, which I think a lot of creators want to do, there are more traditional paths to do that. A novel, you write the full thing out, you get people to read it who you trust, and you find an agent that way. And you can write short stories, or for comic books, or kids picture books or whatnot. You can create pitches and find an agent that way. And I can get into specifics there if you want, but in general, trying to find an agent, one of the easiest ways to do that is to look at the acknowledgments or on the websites of the authors and that you like, and be able to see who reps them and who else they rep, and what their guidelines are, what they're looking for. And that's a usually pretty helpful thing to do.
Yeah, I know within the sphere of webcomics and kind of online artists in general, there are a few resources that some creators have started putting together. Like there's a big list of agents who represent like visual artists specifically. And I think there's another one for agents who represent graphic novels that kind of get passed
Right.
around sometimes when the conversation about representation comes up. And I have kind of a follow-up question to the one that I was just asking, because it sounds like you found a lot of your clients kind of on your own and approached them. But for many creators, it'll often be the other way around, where they'll be actively looking and trying to put together pitches and send in queries to agents to try to find representation where they might not be on anyone's radar yet. What would be the way to kind of spin it for, like, because a lot of these lists are presenting the agents as if you were writing a query for a singular graphic novel, right? And there's not really a lot of directives about how do you spin it if what you're creating is a webcomic. Like, do you just say that?
Sure.
Like,
Yeah, and I haven't really been focusing enough on the reality that a lot of the webcomics that exist nowadays, because of places like Webtoons and Tapas, are actually graphic novels, or long run narrative stories, right? And when you think about turning those into something, then you're looking for people who can represent those things, and that can be different than what a lot of people in the agenting world might, I don't want to say consider a webcomic, but I think when people think of a webcomic in publishing, sometimes they think of Ali Brosh, right? Or and not necessarily Nimona, right? Which are both webcomic based and but totally different kind of publications. So I do think when you have something that's more narrative based, that is having some success on say Tapas or Webtoons, and you're looking to potentially publish this or something else in print form with a traditional publisher, then you are looking to connect to an agent who does the graphic novels that fall into that space. Whether it's really important that you get it pinned down, whether this is YA or middle grade or adult, whether it's something that would be good for a publisher like Skybound versus a publisher like First Second. That's actually pretty different, and you don't need to know all those things, but part of that is your own interest and love, and different agents rep into different places. I think it's actually kind of interesting to know that when it comes to Marvel and DC and the cartoonists and comics that head into that direction, which is different but not completely out of the Venn diagram, those people don't have agents. They have film and TV agents, but a lot of times they don't have book to film agents. I'm sorry, not book to film, literary agents, unless they're writing sort of prose books. And I think that sort of idea of being your own siloed thing makes sense, except for the fact that once you start trying to get a deal in the traditional publishing world, then an agent is worth it. So yeah, the pitch, but those lists are good. I think that people always come up. One of the things that's find interesting about all writers of any style is that they sort of talk themselves into, you hear one rumor and you hold on to it. Sometimes that's true for one agent, but not true for everyone. And the simple matter the simple fact of the matter is that you just need to find the like agents who represent similar things. That's important, and you follow the rules. But the rules tend to be simple: is that you create a one-page pitch letter. I have a whole YouTube video about how to create that for any genre. It doesn't really matter. And then you're putting together just a bio and a sample chapter, I mean, or three, and outlines of the book. And except nowadays the bio probably needs to add things like your social media numbers and stuff like that, which is a shame, but you add them if they're value add, and if they aren't, then you don't. It doesn't matter, and people will fall in love with the story or they won't. If you're an artist and an illustrator, sorry, that's the same thing. If you're an artist and a writer versus pairing up with someone else, it gives you an advantage. The disadvantage is that sometimes people will like your writing and not like your art, and sometimes they'll like your art and not your writing. But the people that like both, and this sort of plays with if you pair up with someone too, the people who like both will then be more interested in both. So I think that it's it depends. It's so heavily, as you can hear, it's so heavily based on what you want to be doing. If you're doing short web comics where it's probably a collection of that, then that's a different kind of game and a different kind of agent than someone writing something that is a young adult fantasy series. And sometimes you just can't get a deal because you've been around for too long almost, and it just costs a lot of money to put things together. That's what happened with Ava's Demon, and that's why the way it finally worked was a Kickstarter through Skybound. So yeah, there's a lot of different angles at this depending on what you want to be doing. And I'm sorry for the scattershot and nebulous answer, but it is about what you're up to.
It sounds like there's so many options. And you were saying earlier that you're pretty full. You have a pretty full schedule. I'm just curious, like, how many creators does an agent represent at any given time? How do you know when you're full?
Sure. Well, that's a personal agent question. I think that, first of all, I want to say that you don't always, like, it's okay to go with a younger, newer agent, especially if they're at a good agency, because the agency will support and share the wisdom that they have and help that person build their list. And we all start somewhere. And like I said, my first webcomic was Kate Beaton. We did just fine. But in terms of fullness, the reason why I feel that way now is because I feel like if I take someone else on, then it might take away some of the time I have for my other clients. And I think that when it comes to any project that involves illustration, there are agents, some of them who just represent illustrators and sort of have them almost as if they're a website, almost if they're like a catalog, and they build their relationships with art directors at different places and sort of make sure that people know that there's art to be had there. And that's a different kind of load perhaps than others. I feel pretty full because I represent a lot of different things. I don't just represent webcomics. I represent sci-fi, fantasy, and picture books and literary fiction. And so the good news for that is that I can send those things out at the same time and they don't compete with each other. But the bad thing is that then I can almost take on too much. And so I just got to be really cognizant of that. I think people probably take between 25 and 40 clients when they are at a peak place in their career. And that's sort of on average, I would say. Yeah. But you have that many people, it takes I can make a deal for you and it would take you 2 years for you to finish the art. And then it comes out a year later. So sometimes, it's the on and off part. It's not like we disappear, but you're going and you're working on your project and you're doing something else. And when you need me, I'm here. So it's like activated clients versus not. I think that's a big deal. So it's about really, if I repped 20 thriller writers who published a book a year, that would be really hard versus
It's a lot of thrillers.
yeah, exactly. Also, in thrillers, like a lot of them come out in the fall. So you just can't do that, So it really does depend on what you rep.
Ah, that's interesting. When it comes to webcomic creators specifically, as opposed to like the other areas of the literary world, what do you find the biggest challenges are for representing those creators?
Well, even though webcomics have been around for a little bit now in terms of publishing, there's just not a huge amount of data. And so if a publisher pays a lot of money for a book and it doesn't do well, then they'll spend probably 2 years being like, we spent money on that book, it didn't do so well, we shouldn't spend that much money on a webcomic again. Until something sort of blows up that they didn't spend a lot of money on, or they see some things that like they didn't bid on that they had in on submission and it did really well. And so I think one of the challenges is it's still like a new industry, and publishers don't know what they're doing necessarily with them. Some of them are more, again, Andrews McMeel is like more specialized into that place, but others are not, and they want to dabble in there, and so they get burned. Like, I mean, Nimona, I think, is a perfectly interesting example. I mean, Nimona did so well for HarperCollins that it built an entire YA graphic novel line out of it. Not just YA, middle grade, a whole graphic novel line, Harper Alley. And Harper Alley's been like constricting and constricting, constricting. And they're great people over there, but it's just been, when not everything happens at the same level, then the publisher who's looking at a lot of other things sort of, they constrict as well. So I think some of the biggest problems is, how do you fit webcomics, which people just call a webcomic as if it's a whole genre, and recognize as webcomics are totally different, as you guys know. Like, there's all sorts of different types, from the base paneling to humor to topics, everything from feel good to feel hilarious and angsty. There's all sorts of different types of things, and you can't just shove it into a box. And I think that's one of the biggest problems, and it's one of the things that I work the hardest on, is trying to be able to create a proposal that explains why this work, whatever we're selling, is undeniable. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. We have a pretty good track record, but something that happened recently, like I represent Extra Fabulous, and I couldn't sell it. I could not sell Extra Fabulous, but Alex Antone at Skybound was like, I think there's something here and I really like it. I would like to try a Kickstarter thing. So we said, fine. And I raised $450,000 on Kickstarter, and they did a lot of work with him to create this material. And so sometimes it's about having someone who can help you find the other avenues when the traditional ones don't work. So it's tricky because it's a smaller niche market.
It sounds like there's just it's a difficult place, because webcomics aren't a genre, they're a medium. So
Exactly.
It's hard to
Well said.
be able to
It's like
say,
the whole
okay,
manga thing.
yeah,
Or-
like manga, exactly. It's just so everyone's doing all kinds of different things, and that's a really cool part of webcomics, because there's no gatekeeping when you're first starting out. But then, like, you suddenly have to figure out, which door do I go
Right.
in? I don't even know.
Right. And the publishers like Tapas and Webtoons, they're struggling too. Not struggling with the putting something up there and seeing how it goes, but they try and have their own things where they can print and publish stuff. And their model is pretty simple. If it gets big enough, then they try and do it. But do they have the full understanding of what it means to make success out of a traditional publishing model? Or do they not want that, and they just want to reach the direct audience in the same way? And again, this is a new world in terms of that as well, direct audience connection. And comics are the epitome of that, but I sort of mean monetizing it in a way that's not gross, a way that like gives fans what they want: good content, good material, good things. It's almost like moving Artist Alley of a con to publication. And so sometimes that's the right move too. But like you said, what you just said is perfect. It's not a genre. It's something so much more, and it's really tricky along those lines because it's so slapped into a singular thing.
Yeah, for sure. So I do want to ask, what is your favorite part of the publishing and representation process? Like, what's the most gratifying experience for you?
That's a great question, and it's not a singular question. There's but I have sort of narrowed that down to a few moments. There's definitely the discovery, is just because it's almost like, as soon as you start reading something that you think is amazing, a clock starts ticking. I'm like, oh my gosh, has someone else found this? Do I have to like, are they repped already? Can I please? Oh, can I work with this person? And I like get jumpy and excited, and when you discover and then sign that person, it's such a great and exciting moment, because then you get to start working in this larger scale of things. And then the sale itself, where you get to call up your client and tell them about a sale, and how that might be a life-changing moment. And then there's everything from awards to which are often unexpected, but can be life-changing, and to royalty checks, to foreign deals, to film and TV. I mean, there's basically, what I'm saying is like every marker is really a steps of joy. And what is that? That's just sharing sharing moments of success is my favorite things. And being further down the line and just sort of recognizing that someone made it and they can quit their day job if they want to. That's the hardest thing, right? Do you quit your day job? And when you can get to that point, it's a really, and I help them get there. It's just it's such a great moment.
Yeah, that leads into the last question, which is, I guess, a chance to gush a bit. Which projects are you most proud of working with? Not necessarily the ones that sold the best, but that you just loved.
I mean, that's a great question. It's a hard question. For various reasons, because there's some sweat equity that people don't necessarily see that go into some of the work that I do. Kate Beaton's Ducks, which I had mentioned, which is coming out soon. I mean, that's something that I'm so proud of Kate for, and I'm less proud of me. It's not like I did anything right, but being able to create a publishing environment where she felt comfortable enough to create what I think is going to be one of the most influential graphic memoirs that exist I'm proud of working with something that's important. I think that the work that Tilly does is just so very important. But then I think about, XKCD and the amount of work I had to do just to get them to get him to sort of answer my phone call was a different kind of pride I have. Does that make sense? It's like I worked really hard to be able to convince Randall to take an effort, or take a flyer on me. And I work with so many other really brilliant and amazing creators. The other thing that's so much fun to work with is something like I represent an artist. See, it's funny. I'm about to head into artists versus webcomics. A lot of times I don't want to say they're not interchangeable at all. We're talking about webcomics as a very specific thing. But one thing I recognize is there are some people I represent who could be into this space. And that's the other thing, is that you don't have to start there either. You can start somewhere else if a webcomic doesn't work, and you can head into a different direction of just trying a graphic novel. And I know this is not answering your question at all, but I wanted to share this. And then, you can come back around, or you can simultaneously pub, or, Sarah Anderson makes sure that Cryptid Club and Fangs and whatnot are published online for free, and a lot of publishers don't like that. So you can still come at these things in a number of different angles. In terms of not necessarily the ones that are sold the best, I can't just throw I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I don't know why, aside from the ones I just said, but I'm proud of all my webcomics. I love this space because it is something not many people do, and I feel like I specialize in. And so each one of those things are something I had to convince in a big way to be able to do. So someone like, Rosemary Moscow, web comics that Andrews McNeil do, sort of leads to all these other interesting projects, from like National Geographic books to her recent book on pigeons. And it's like any individual small thing can just be the beginning of something else. And I can be really proud of that. So I hope that's a helpful answer. I hope this is helpful at all. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could just hear the passion that you have for all of the projects that you're working on, and just finding all the little things that they can do, because it sounds like a very unpredictable sort of thing, but at the same time you're doing it. You're like finding all of these like weird things, like, oh, you want to write about pigeons? Okay, we'll find a way for you to write about pigeons. Like, that's so
Well,
cool.
the question is, like, what if things don't work? That's the other thing an agent does. If something doesn't work, then you need to be able to have someone who can help you in the next step. And that's the hardest part of any career, is the second book after the first doesn't work. And part of what all this is about you putting yourself on the line and being able to have, I guess, a stronger line. I've never used that metaphor before. I'm not sure it works. By having someone else support you is just really important. And it can't just be your parents or your significant other. Those people are probably too nice to you. You need to have someone who can be realistic and who knows their way about it. And we also work on spec. Like, you're not paying us retainers or anything like that. We succeed when you succeed. So the passion has to be there. And I think that publishing is hard. It's a hard world to live in, and there's so many people out there doing these things. But when it works out, it usually works out because something's great. And I am just so excited for all your listeners to put your great thing out into the world, and to be part of that, or whether that's just me consuming it or representing it. And funny enough, not to just couch that downwards, like sometimes that great thing needs to be in a drawer until, like, you your art style becomes greater, or the idea becomes great. There's all sorts of angles to that, but the greatness comes from you, and that's still the thing that's most important. It still stems from you creators, and I'm so glad that this podcast exists as a networking ability to just allow y'all to work with each other. That's the community of webcomics. It's the Artist Alley. It's the supporting each other. It's building up. But I just want to say, like, agents are part of that. We're not on the other side of it. We want to be part of that, to be able to help y'all out. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the questions in this episode, I forgot to mention it when we kind of started getting into those questions, but we took submissions from our community of listeners just to find out what kind of things people wanted to know about, like, the role of agents within the world of webcomics, because it's definitely something that a lot of creators are interested in or curious about. And because the field changes so frequently, it can be hard to kind of pin down solid answers. I had forgotten about this until you kind of mentioned it, but that thing about publishers not liking it when the whole of a work is available online for free, I feel like that used to be a major stumbling block for a lot of webcomics who were like, well, there's no way I can get this published because people can just see it. I've already lost my exclusivity. I'm out of the game. But that's completely changed now.
Yes. I mean, the publishers are still pretty stubborn on wanting to have some exclusive content in there, but the battle where they want like 51% new content can be dropped quite a bit. And depending on how sort of, what kind of muscle you command, can be nothing. But as a warning, they still probably want some new material in there, because they believe that allows it to be something new. But I think it's interesting. I mean, webcomics, some of them have said to me, like Nathan Pyle said to me something that was really smart. He was saying, like, why wouldn't I put in ones that have already been done that I know that are like the best of? People love these. They're their favorites. Like, why would I exclude those to put in things that haven't been tested? And I buy that. So, there's different ways to look at it. And I think that one thing that's really important and amazing about webcomics is you guys are your own businesses, because you see your numbers, you see what people like, how to interact with your fans. And that knowledge is important. It's important to bring to your agent. It's important to bring to your publisher. And it's something that will help you get ahead of a lot of other kind of creatives that are out there, because they don't have that.
Yeah, I can't wait for this episode to come out and just see what this sparks for people, because I think this has been a really good one.
Thank you.
So I think I'm going to wrap it up here. Again, thank you so much, Seth, for being with us. It has been truly educational, inspirational. We are so looking forward to getting involved with agents and being a little less shy about that. I think for me, definitely. But anyway, I have been one of your hosts, Delphina, and you can find my webcomic Somnolus at somnolus.com.
And I have been Thane, and you can find my comics at witchwoodcomic.com and chiralt.sevensmith.net.
And I'm Seth Fishman, the literary agent at the Gernert Company. And you can find me at Seth A.S. Fishman on Instagram, Twitter, or you can find me at the website of the Gernert Company. And I do look forward to seeing some queries and all your greatness. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Screen Tones. Subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts to be notified of new episodes. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at ScreenTonesCast.